What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another Bros Talking Soccer podcast. My name is Dave Knittel. Today is Friday, June 29th, day 16 of the World Cup. No World Cup matches, but we're still talking the World Cup. My brothers are off doing things in the real world. I am joined by Mark Lawson from Game Day Tourist, though. Mark, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks, Dave. It's sun shining, weekend's here. We've got some knockout football to enjoy, so looking forward to it. How about you?
I am doing well as well. Mark, do you want to tell the people a little bit about Game Day Tourist and your blog?
Yep, okay, so Game Day Tourist focuses on exploring the world of sport, mostly through travel, culture, and fan experiences. So I've been looking at this World Cup for a very slightly different angle to everybody else. You won't really find me discussing tactics and player stats and things like that. I'll be more looking at the venues, the host cities, the fans, and how the World Cup's been reported around the world. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Game Day Tourist, and then my blog is at gamedaytourist.com.
Absolutely. And we have Twitter and his website already linked in the video description. Mark, if you send me the Instagram, or I can probably track it down, we will put that in as well. Podcast listeners, you will already have that in there. If you are watching live on YouTube, please feel free to interact with us as we're going along here. We have the chat feature up if you're listening to the podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in, but we also record this thing live on YouTube, so feel free to come hang out with us. Now, as Mark said, we're going to be doing this from a slightly different angle from our previous podcasts, which have focused heavily on kind of tactics and players. So, starting things off, Mark, what have been your favorite moments from this World Cup thus far?
So like I say, for me, the moments have been maybe off the pitch rather than on it, and particularly focusing on the fans. I've really enjoyed Panama. I know they've been terrible as a footballing nation, but just to see what it means for them to be at the World Cup finals is absolutely incredible. Seeing them celebrate a goal to make it 6-1 like they had just qualified for the knockout stages that's what the World Cup is all about for me. And on that note, seeing their national broadcaster for the first national anthem, seeing the presenters move to tears, that's just fantastic. And again, with the Tunisian coach in tears before the first game, I think they're the real big moments for me when you see the fans enjoying the World Cup. One more I'll probably add there is the Mexican fans taking to making South Koreans their Mexican brothers. That's been brilliant. I love the bewildered look on the South Koreans' faces as they're hoisted onto the shoulders of groups of Mexicans. It's been a fantastic spectacle from a cultural perspective.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what the World Cup is about, too. So I know a lot of us focus on it as a sporting spectacle and the best teams and all of that, but there is an element of these other countries who, we don't know a ton about, right? I don't necessarily know much about Panama, but we see them at the World Cup and we see how they're behaving. We can learn a little bit more about them. And again, it just makes like an incredible impression. And I think that is as much about the World Cup as anything else. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the World Cup is kind of, there's a podcast, I can't think of the name of, but their tagline is kind of, the World Cup's happening in Russia, but it's really happening everywhere else. And like you say, for me, that's what it's all about. When you see Argentinian TV having a minute's silence for the death of their national game, kind of those guys really, really take their soccer seriously. You realise that this is so much more than 22 people against each other on a football pitch somewhere in Russia.
Yeah, and we love following all of that. Now, I know you're an England fan. You're based in England. That's where you live and you're from. So I wanted to get your thoughts on how England have done thus far, in your opinion.
I really like this team. I like what Gareth Southgate's done. I think, like many England fans, it was an underwhelming appointment and we just expected more of the same. I think the last 10, 12 years as an England fan have been disappointing. Or very difficult, I would say. It's been quite laboured and uninspiring. We've now got to the point where we don't expect to achieve anything when it comes to major tournaments. So it's been really, really good to see this team, this youthful team, full of excitement. They want to play for their country. They're having fun. There's a lot of personality. Just Southgate has made it a real joy to watch the team again. And just the enthusiasm is something that's coming through to the nation. And I think we're all excited about watching England again.
I'm not going to ask you to really project out, too far, but, I know you're a fan. What do you think about, them coming up against Colombia and their future in this tournament? Are you just taking it one game at a time? Are you just enjoying it in the moment? What are your thoughts on that?
So for me personally, I kind of would have liked to try and go all out to win that game last night. I think winning is a habit, and I think the momentum would have been good. And this is something that's been all over our media all day today, is discussing, have we improved our chances by coming second? On paper, it's an easier side of the draw. And if you get past Colombia, there's every chance of making a semi-final or something like that. But don't forget, we went out of the last European Championships to Iceland, which was supposed to be the easier draw. So there are no easy games now in this World Cup. Everybody's here to win it and see how far they can go. So yes, there's not the giants that are in the other side of the draw, but they're not necessarily playing well. So yes, it's there for us to get to the semi-final or even further if possible, but just don't count your chickens is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I always find it interesting. Every fan of a team that isn't like Brazil, Spain, or Germany always says they can get to the semifinal. Nobody ever says that they can get to the final. I just find it fascinating that nobody, wants to take that leap of faith. And I mean, if they can get to the semifinal, they can get to the final. So I just find that very funny, because I mean, I kind of do it as well. When you're talking about dark horses, you say, oh, they can get to the semifinal, but nobody wants to go kind of that next step. And I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, so I think the semi-final is the point where you maybe come up against a traditional powerhouse, and then you don't fancy your chances so much. But maybe this is a block in the English psyche as well, because we haven't been past a semi-final since 1966. We still talk about the semi-final of 1990. So that kind of, for us, seems to be the sticking point, and maybe it's there in our heads.
That's funny, but it also happens with other fans too. So, but I agree, that is when you expect to come up against, maybe a powerhouse. But again, it's knockout. Anything can happen in one match. So, I think England can go far there. Now, biggest surprises and disappointments for you throughout the tournament can be generic, can be teams, it can be, however you want to take this. What have been your biggest? Maybe let's start with surprises. So, like on the positive side.
Okay, so on the pitch, my biggest surprise has been Croatia. So before the World Cup, we did a preview show, and I tipped Croatia to do particularly poorly. And I fully expected them to really, really struggle and maybe scrape through the group. But they've been very impressive. I can't say I've watched every minute of every one of their games, but they've come through with 9 points. And there aren't many teams that have done that so far. So that's they've been the big surprise for me from a team point of view. Another surprise for me, I guess maybe this is a disappointment as well, but no one has really staked a claim to be the favourites to win this tournament at the moment. All of the big teams have made hard work of it and disappointed somewhat. I know tournaments are normally won by teams that grow into it, and it's not necessarily the team that looks best in the group stages that wins it. But I would have expected there to be at least one team that looked like they were the front runner. And then one final thing on my biggest surprises is I think VAR has really added to this tournament. As a neutral watching many of the games, I think it's been fantastic how much drama and suspense it's added. I think everybody's now become used to it. Everybody knows that the initial excitement might be turned around, and it's just made for some fantastic stories.
Yeah, that is a really good point. I know when we did because you were on our pre-World Cup show, and we highlighted that as something to look out for, and we didn't have a ton of confidence in it. But outside of maybe 2 or 3 instances where there was some confusion, it took a really long time. VAR has been pretty efficient and more or less gotten the calls correct, in my opinion, on most occasions. So again, given my relatively low expectations for how I thought it was going to go, I think it has been a pleasant surprise. So that's a really good call out there. Any disappointments though, so more focused on the negative side for you?
Yeah, so obviously this is not overly original, but Germany have been a massive disappointment. I know in our preview podcast I tipped them to struggle, but I really didn't think they would struggle this badly. I thought at least they would make it through the group, making hard work of it, but it's just been amazing. As maybe you can imagine, the British press have absolutely revelled in the German demise, which I think is unfortunate, but it's certainly been a talking point here, and they definitely disappointed. I have a number of German friends, and actually took some visitors I had for work on Wednesday to watch the game in a pub. That backfired spectacularly, but they are very, very disappointed. Not quite to the level of Argentinian TV taking a minute's silence, but they've taken it hard.
Honestly, I get it, but it's tough to feel bad for them. I mean, you know, they won the most recent World Cup. They've made the most finals of any team. They have 4 World Cup titles. Yes, they've been a disappointment, but I'm not necessarily heartbroken for them.
Absolutely.
Now, Mark, so I know we focus more, you know, a little bit more on the on-field stuff so far, but I know you definitely wanted to hit on some of the off-field stuff, you know, fans, media coverage, or whatever. I'm going to kind of turn it over to you and, you know, let you take the lead on some things that you want to talk about now.
Yeah, so maybe I just wanted to get your thoughts on some things. So in terms of fans, I think it's been a little bit disappointing, the number of Europeans that have travelled to Russia. I'm certainly not criticising, because I'm a European and I didn't make the trip, but it's been brilliant to see the South and Central Americans traveling in such great numbers. I think they've really added to this tournament. Every time you watch one of those teams play, there's so much noise. I think 30,000 Colombians turned up to their first group game. Peru fans have traveled in their thousands. Everywhere you seem to go, everywhere the cameras go, there are Mexican fans. And even in my local pub, I found Mexican fans last weekend. So they've been brilliant. And I just wondered your thoughts on the fan situation, because I know you were concerned prior to the World Cup.
Well, absolutely. And I think that we've seen that there haven't been any issues. There have been a handful of matches maybe that didn't sell out, I think, early on in the tournament. And since then, I mean, it's been fantastic atmosphere. That Argentina versus Nigeria match, those Argentina fans were incredible. You've already highlighted, I mean, I was going to talk about Colombia and Mexico, but I think everyone can see just how incredible they've been supporting their teams. Even the African fans who haven't maybe traveled, you know, in the same amount of numbers as the South American fans, they've been loud. They have, you know, their dances, they're passionate throughout the entire match. And really, as much as the on-field product is a part of it, so much of the atmosphere and elements of the World Cup is the fans and the stands and the atmosphere that they can create. So it's been incredible to watch all of that.
And yeah, one thing I also wanted to touch on when it came to the fans was Iran. And this has been the first time that women have been able to go and watch their team play. And it's obviously been big news around the world. And I think that's just fantastic that football or soccer has managed to have this impact. I don't know how long it will last or whether this will be allowed back in Iran, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. So for those who may not know, back in 1979, I believe, Mark, you're probably a little bit better with me on this, but I think in 1979, when they had the Iranian Revolution, some of the laws in Iran kind of started to go more conservatively, and along those lines, women haven't been allowed into soccer stadiums since that time. Do you want to elaborate at all for people who may not know the backstory here?
To be honest with you, I think I don't really know much more than that. All I know is that, yeah, women in Iran aren't allowed to go into football stadiums and watch the game. It's for men only. So when the women watch their team in the World Cup in their first game, that was the first time since, as you say, 1979.
Yep. And so they were actually allowed into Anzadi, I think is how you pronounce that stadium, which is Iran's home stadium. And that was the first time. They weren't there in person. They were there to watch it on the big screen. But still, this was a monumental deal. There have been instances where Iranian women have tried to sneak into games, trying to act as men, and they've been arrested. And so hopefully, you know, they continue this trend of allowing women into their stadium. So that's another great thing to point out, Mark.
And then some other points I wanted to touch on and just get your thoughts on. One from very early in the World Cup is the bizarre story that broke about Rafa Marquez and him not being allowed to use any American brands. You're probably a lot closer to this, so I'll get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, we tweeted this or retweeted this story from the Bros Talking Soccer account. New York Times had a fantastic article on this. I knew that Rafa was tied into some, you know, drug happenings, at least from the standpoint of he was being charged by the U.S. government. But I had no idea the depths of what this all meant and the implications for Rafa, for the Mexican team, and for this tournament. So for those who don't know, Rafa Marquez is being accused of helping a drug kingpin, I think, launder money, or he's involved in some way. And for that reason, again, this is all accused. He's not been proven of anything. But for that reason, he's been blacklisted by the U.S. government. Now, what that means when he's blacklisted is he can't interact with any U.S. companies. So if the Mexican team is sponsored by a company based in America, if the Mexican team uses a bank that's based in America, if they stay at a hotel, fly on an airline, Rafa cannot be involved. And so there are all these ridiculous stories about him having to take different flights or stay in a different hotel or wear different practice jerseys that don't have sponsors. During the World Cup, I think the water bottles are Powerade. He can't drink from that water bottle. He has to have a separate water bottle, not branded, to drink from. And this story is just so wild. So if you haven't heard it, we'll add it to the podcast description. You have to go check it out. But Mark, so that's my background on it. Anything you want to add from it?
Yeah, so I don't have many other points to what you've made. It's a crazy, crazy story. But just what I can't understand is, how did it take 3 days into the World Cup to break? How did we not know about this a long time ago?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a really good point, because, again, I knew that he was in some sort of trouble, but I had no idea the depths that the Mexican Federation had to go through. I think they even said FIFA had to use a different bank to pay them their payment bonus for being in the World Cup, because it couldn't come through a U.S. affiliated bank in any way. And so, yeah, I had no idea the depths of all of this. And I mean, credit to the New York Times for keeping the story under wraps until it broke.
Absolutely. And just to say as well, it's crazy that this is a guy who's playing in his 5th World Cup. So it's not somebody we've never heard of before. This is probably one of the biggest players in the Mexican team. It's just bizarre.
Absolutely.
So another story I wanted to touch on, or not really a story, but I wanted to get your thoughts on Diego Maradona. For me, what we saw the other night was just very sad, maybe predictable, but this is someone that people argue is the greatest footballer of all time, and then we see that from him.
Yeah, I mean, he's been known to, I think, have a good time, is how I'm going to say it. I mean, throughout his career, I think he was suspended for the '94 World Cup for drugs. And based on, again, what we saw, it seems like he may not be well. So, you wish the best for him. Guys live, especially professionals can often, with the money and power and all of that, they can live a fast lifestyle, and you see that maybe taking its toll. So, I think we saw that play out on live television to a certain extent. We wish him well. Is he in the hospital? I know he went to the hospital. Is he okay?
Yeah, I've not heard much more. And I know he was treated after the game. I don't know if he actually went to hospital or not, but I haven't heard much since then. But yeah, it's very sad to see an icon of the game like that. Something that really kind of hit home for me was when you saw I guess it's his bodyguard or someone like that, having to hold on to him. So because he obviously feared that he was going to tumble over the side of the stand. That's not how we want to see our former greats behaving, and it's very sad, unfortunately.
Absolutely. So wish him well.
Yes, absolutely. And then one other thing I wanted to touch on. So I actually started off this World Cup. I was in Detroit. And I found it quite an interesting experience. It started with the Fox morning breakfast show, the local one. So the 3 presenters on there basically saying that they weren't interested in the World Cup and they weren't going to watch it. So this is the channel that has the rights to show the World Cup in the US. And I figured they would be doing everything they could to advertise it and bring in viewers. And then I also found it very difficult to find the games in Detroit. I'd go to big sports bars with multiple TVs, and they would look at me like I was crazy when I asked them to put the World Cup on. So I know in America, not everybody is a soccer fan, but I kind of figured that it had got to the point where it was big enough in the public consciousness that people would at least be aware of it, and it would be there for the people that wanted to see it. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how this World Cup has gone down with the American public, seeing as the US team aren't there.
Yeah, so I think it definitely depends on where you are in the country. So I'm out in San Jose, California. There is a ton of people from all over the world that kind of live in this city. And so you can see we have a lot of, Mexican fans here. It is a big deal in San Jose. I think ditto for most of the major cities. It surprises me a bit that Detroit, I don't know much about Detroit. I haven't been there, but my guess would be maybe they don't have as much of a immigrant population, or maybe the areas that you were in, you weren't seeing that. And that would be my assumption. Now, regarding the morning show, just a quick question. How old were the presenters on that show? Were they a bit older or were they young?
No, I'd say they were middle-aged, so late 30s, early 40s.
Exactly. So what you'll see a lot of times, especially in America, the younger generation coming up. So I'm about 30 right now. So right around 35 and younger, soccer is the most popular sport or second most popular sport for most of those people. And it's a generational thing. Still, especially in people who are in kind of mainstream media, they still like to hate on soccer. It's an easy target. And you're seeing less and less of that as the younger generations grow up and get older. So it's definitely changing on that front. Another person who I'd like to point out is at the goalkeeper, I think is his name on Twitter. His name's Jonathan Tannenwald. He covers soccer for the Philadelphia newspaper, but he covers it more generally as well. He had some interesting tweets. He likes to tweet about the television ratings and present that information. And he tweeted that the Germany-Sweden game actually had more viewers than the 2010 USA-Algeria game, which was the famous Landon Donovan last-second goal. So even though we're not seeing quite the same numbers as we have been, if the US was in the tournament, we're still seeing pretty decent numbers. It was, I think, around 10 million people that watched that Germany-Sweden game where, the US doesn't have necessarily a rooting interest. So it's not quite as big as, it would have been if the US was in the tournament, but it is still being watched, still being covered, and you can still find it a lot of places, which was comforting for me because I didn't know how this was going to go either. This is the first time in my lifetime the US hasn't been in it. So it's been great to see.
And do you think maybe the 2026 announcement has led to more people watching than would have done?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I think people were either going to watch or not going to watch. I don't know how much of big news that was, especially for people who aren't hardcore soccer fans. Like for me, it was a big deal. I think for a lot of people in kind of the soccer bubble in America, it was a huge deal. But most people, it didn't really register. It probably won't register until a couple of months before that tournament kicks off in the mainstream consciousness, to be perfectly honest.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Like I say, just a surprise, and even from a brand perspective, the Fox thing, like you think that they would be selling it even if they had no interest.
Yeah, that's really odd because I know out here on the West Coast, the San Jose morning show, which sometimes, I'll see the first lead in after or before the World Cup, which is the only time I ever watch the news is if it's still on while I'm watching a sporting event. They're like the first lead in will be about the World Cup, and they at least try. So again, that's a weird sort of business decision from the Fox affiliate in Detroit.
Yeah, no, it's a strange one for sure. I think that's all the questions I have for you there, Dave.
Okay, awesome. So JS has been with us, sending us a couple messages on YouTube. So just wanted to shout him out, thank him. He was teasing you a little bit, Mark, for calling the sport soccer, being that you're British. He's been impressed with Panama. And really quick, just touch point on putting the bow on the Rafa Marquez. He had some sort of affiliation with the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico. So that was that was just last little points from that. Mark, anything else you wanted to add about the World Cup or anything?
No, just the last couple of moments I've enjoyed. Neuer playing left wing. That's something that's going to go down in history, I think. And then Batshuayi last night. Everybody's seen that multiple times on Twitter. But I think he took that incredibly well. He seems like a really good guy and really good to see him laugh that off.
Absolutely, yeah. So he owned up to it right away on Twitter. So that was hilarious to see. Before we get out of here, really quick, wanted to mention our partner, StadiumScene.tv. They're a partner for Bros Talking Soccer, as well as Game Day Tourist and other blogs. They are a sports travel website for people going to stadiums in the United States, at least right now. Hopefully they're expanding elsewhere. But right now, if you're going to a stadium, any sport, basketball, hockey, baseball, soccer, you want to go to stadiumscene.tv to check out, user recommendations, where to park, bars to check out before and after the match. So go check them out. In addition to that, they partner with content creators like Game Day Tourist, like us at Bros Talking Soccer, the Soccer Tavern, Lads Podcast, all different kinds of sports. It's not just soccer as well. So if you're a fan of other sports, check them out. If you're a fan of soccer, definitely check them out as well. They have blog posts, YouTube videos, podcasts, and so much more. Again, stadiumscene.tv. TV. Mark, do you want to remind people about Game Day Tourist and where they can find you?
Yep, so they can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Game Day Tourist, and the website is gamedaytourist.com.
All right, so definitely go check that out. They are linked in the podcast and or video description. If you're watching live on YouTube, we are going to be back, at least Christian and I will be back in a few hours recapping at a more detailed level, kind of the group stage and previewing the knockout rounds. If you're listening to the podcast, you're going to hear a little bit of music, and then we'll be back really soon. Mark, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, everyone. I will talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in. See you, everybody.